Before we talk about the championships, before we talk about the records, before we talk about the rings, let's talk about what happens when the lights go completely dark, when the crowd disappears, and when a man who spent his entire life being the most physically dominant force on this earth finds himself alone in a bedroom, strapping a plastic mask to his face just to survive the night. Because right now, in 2026, Shaquille O'Neal, a man worth $500 million, a man who shattered steel backboards with his bare hands, a man who once made the entire NBA rebuild its equipment just to withstand his existence, is fighting a silent war that no championship trophy can help him win. He stops breathing over 100 times every single night. His hips are destroyed from decades of violent collision. He buried 2 fathers in the same year, one who built him through fear, and one who abandoned him before he ever learned to walk. He watched his best friend's life get erased by fog and gravity over the hills of Calabasas on a Sunday morning. He lost custody of his children, built a $500 million empire, and still drives home to a house that echoes. This is not a highlight reel. This is the real story. And by the time we're done, you will never see the biggest man in the room the same way again. He was born into absence. Newark, New Jersey, 1972, is not a city that promises anything. It is a city that teaches you early that the world owes you nothing, that survival is not a birthright but a daily negotiation. Lucille O'Neal was 18 years old when she gave birth to a son, and the man who helped create that son made a decision in those earliest days. He would leave. Joe Tony did not drift away. He made a choice. He walked out the door and left a wound so deep that not even 30 years of global superstardom could fully close it. From his very first days on Earth, something about this child was different in a way that could not be hidden or ignored. He grew at a pace that baffled pediatricians and confused city bus drivers. By the time he was 3 years old, drivers were demanding adult fare and refusing to believe the massive child standing in front of them was not an adult in disguise. Lucille had to carry his birth certificate like a legal document just to ride public transit. In a neighborhood where being conspicuous could get you killed, her son was the most conspicuous person on every block he ever walked down. Then came Sergeant Philip Harrison. He did not arrive soft. He arrived with the rigid, unbreakable posture of a man who had seen what the streets could do to young men who were never properly hardened. Philip Harrison loved his stepson the way a drill sergeant loves a recruit. Through discipline, through demand, through the kind of pressure that is either going to break you or build you into something the world cannot ignore. There was no warmth the way television teaches us warmth is supposed to look. There was expectation. There was consequence. There was the constant, heavy silence of a man who withheld praise like it was classified information. When the army moved the family to Würzburg, Germany, a teenage boy who already stood 6 feet 8 inches tall and wore a size 17 shoe was suddenly an American giant in a foreign land, unable to disappear into any crowd, unable to find a desk at school that his knees could fit beneath, unable to escape the weight of his own visibility. He was 13 years old and already looked like someone's worst nightmare. Philip Harrison handed him a basketball, not as a gift, but as a survival tool. And in the freezing European wind, on outdoor courts far from any audience, a boy who had been given nothing but size and pain began to carve something out of both. He shot baskets until his hands went numb. He practiced until long after the sun went down. And through every drill, through every exhausting repetition, what he was really doing was chasing a single nod of approval from a man who had decided that giving it too easily would ruin him. Philip Harrison never told his stepson he was proud. He showed it in the way he kept pushing. But a boy who has already been abandoned by one father does not always have the emotional vocabulary to read that language correctly. He heard the silence as another form of rejection. He chased greatness, in part, because it was the only thing loud enough to drown out the quiet of feeling like he was never quite enough. The summer of 1992 changed professional basketball with the kind of violence that restructures an entire industry. Orlando selected Shaquille O'Neal first overall and introduced him to the NBA. And the NBA was completely unprepared. At 7 feet 1 inch tall and 300 pounds, he was not just a big man. He was a physical event. He was something the sports infrastructure had not been designed to handle. Within his first months as a professional, he dunked with such force in Phoenix that the entire steel stanchion holding the basket collapsed like it had been hit by a vehicle. Weeks later in New Jersey, he shattered a fiberglass backboard and sent fragments raining down onto the hardwood floor. The league was forced to redesign and reinforce its equipment. Let that land for a moment. They had to change the physical architecture of their arenas because one man was too powerful for existing structures. The NBA changed its standards because of his body. Hollywood did not wait to be introduced. Executives watched this giant with the disarming, massive smile and understood immediately that he was not just an athlete. He was a cultural phenomenon with the charisma to match the physicality. Within a year and a half of his first professional game, he had a platinum rap album on the charts and a film contract signed. The sports world marveled. He just called it another Tuesday. But fame and dominance are not championships. And in Orlando, despite selling out arenas and obliterating opponents, the one thing that would truly define greatness kept escaping him. The 1995 finals ended in a sweep that left him gutted. No amount of celebrity could fill that specific hollow. He looked at Orlando and understood that if he was going to win what he needed to win, he needed a different stage and a different kind of partner. He packed his legacy into boxes and turned toward Los Angeles. What happened next in Los Angeles between 1996 and 2004 is one of the most complicated and remarkable chapters in the history of American sports. He signed for $121 million and arrived to find a 17-year-old kid with ice in his eyes and a name that was not yet famous, Kobe Bryant. 2 players, 2 completely different personalities, 2 ferocious competitive spirits sharing a locker room, sharing a city, and somehow managing to share 3 consecutive championship rings between 2000 and 2002. 3 straight titles, 3 straight finals MVP awards for him. A level of sustained dominance, so rare that almost no one in the sport's history can claim anything close. He was not just winning. He was rewriting what was physically possible inside a professional basketball game. He overwhelmed defenses not through finesse, but through sheer gravitational force. Entire game plans were built around the single question of how to survive him for 48 minutes, and most of those plans failed anyway. He finished his career with 28,596 points, and is considered by many serious analysts to be the most dominant player the sport has ever seen in terms of raw, physical impact. Not the best shooter, not the best playmaker, the most dominant. There is a difference. And while all of this was happening on the court, he was building something else entirely off of it. A boy who grew up in food stamp lines in Newark, who rode the bus with a birth certificate his mother kept as proof of his age, was quietly engineering a financial empire that most professional athletes never even dream about. He became an early investor in Google before it became Google. He built a portfolio that included 155 fast food franchise locations, 40 fitness centers, and 150 car washes. He turned his name into a brand worth over $400 million. He was not spending money. He was weaponizing it. Every investment was a message to the version of himself that once had nothing. You will never go back there. But the kingdom in Los Angeles was fracturing from the inside. The pressure of sustaining greatness at that level, combined with two enormous egos sharing one throne, turned the locker room cold. The press conferences became battles fought with careful language and strategic silences. When the 2004 finals ended in defeat, the franchise made its decision. They chose the younger man. They traded their three-time champion, their anchor, their center of gravity, to Miami like he was a depreciating asset. He was the most dominant player in the league, and they shipped him to Florida. He was 32 years old. In Miami, he found enough left in the tank to win a fourth championship ring in 2006 with Dwayne Wade. But even that victory carried the shadow of what had been broken in Los Angeles. He eventually retired from the game in 2011 and transitioned into television as one of the most beloved personalities in sports media. The laugh was there every night. The humor was real. But inside the man behind the television performance, things were accumulating. In 2013, within a single 12-month span, he lost both of the men who had defined his understanding of what a father is and is not. Sergeant Philip Harrison died at 74 years old from heart disease. The man who had built him through iron discipline and demanding silence was gone. The one paternal authority he had ever truly respected was suddenly not there, and the void was enormous and disorienting in a way that wealth and fame cannot prepare you for. Then Joe Tony, the biological father who had disappeared during the desperate years of the 1970s, attempted to come back. Now that his abandoned son was one of the most famous and wealthy human beings on the planet, the man who walked away wanted a reconciliation. He refused. He had built walls high enough to keep that particular ghost out. But when Joe Tony died that same year, sick and struggling in poverty, the man who had conquered professional basketball was left standing between two graves asking a question that has no clean answer. When a father abandons his child and comes back only after the child no longer needs him, who is truly the one being left behind? He had always wanted to be a different kind of father. When he and Shawnee Nelson married in a lavish ceremony at the Beverly Hills Hotel in December 2002, it was not just a wedding. It was a declaration of war against his own history. He was going to break the cycle. He was going to be present, consistent, and real in a way that no one had ever been for him. They built a household of 6 children, and he threw himself into the idea of fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else. But intensity is not the same as presence. And the empire he was building required him to be everywhere at once. The road trips extended. The commercial shoots ran late. The brand needed attending, and the brand was always hungry. He built walls high enough to keep poverty out, but inadvertently built them thick enough that his children's voices could not always get through. He provided thousands of square feet of marble and every material comfort imaginable, but the bedtime stories happened less than they should have. The birthdays were complicated by schedules. He was winning the war for their financial security while losing quiet battles for their childhood. When the marriage ended and the divorce was finalized in 2011, a judge granted Shawnee primary custody of their children. He walked out of the courthouse and got into a car customized to fit his enormous frame. And for the first time in his life, the man who owned pieces of multiple industries had absolutely nowhere in particular to go. He had replicated, despite every intention to the contrary, the distance that had marked his own upbringing. The cruelest irony is that he saw it happening and could not stop it. His greatness was the weapon that wounded his own family. Then came 2018, and his son Sharif was diagnosed with a congenital heart defect and required open-heart surgery. The man who had spent 2 decades being physically indestructible sat in a hospital waiting room surrounded by tiny plastic chairs built for people a third of his size and felt, for the first time in his adult life, genuinely powerless. He paced those sterile floors and understood that his body, the one instrument he had always trusted completely, could not help his child on that operating table. All the championship rings in the world could not purchase a single steady heartbeat for his son. The surgery was successful, but something in him changed permanently that day in that waiting room. The myth of invincibility, the Superman identity he had carried since his earliest days of professional basketball, was not just damaged, it was shredded. On the morning of January 26, 2020, a helicopter went down over the hills of Calabasas in thick fog, and Kobe Bryant was gone, 41 years old. A father mid-sentence in his second act. A man whose wisdom was only just beginning to arrive at its fullest expression. He and Kobe had spent years locked in public tension, their partnership and its eventual collapse a constant subject of analysis and debate. But in 2018, they had finally found their way back to each other. Genuine laughter, real warmth, and the kind of hard-won respect that only 2 people who have been through a war together can share. They had rebuilt the brotherhood, and fate gave them only a few months to live inside it. At the memorial at Staples Center, the arena where they had done the impossible together, he stood at the podium in front of thousands of people and broke. His voice, the one that had filled arenas with laughter and trash talk for 20 years, shattered on every sentence of the eulogy. He was not performing grief. He was drowning in it, publicly, without protection, in front of every camera in the world. The giant was not a giant in that moment. He was a man who had lost the only other person on Earth who truly understood what it felt like to breathe air that thin. The years between 2021 and 2026 are years that his fans mostly do not know about, because he does not perform these years for an audience. Following his retirement, his weight climbed past 415 pounds. The daily training regimen that had kept his body functioning at an elite level was gone, and without it, the full accumulation of decades of physical violence began to settle into his joints and his cardiovascular system all at once. His hips, which had absorbed the mechanical equivalent of 50 years of heavy labor compressed into 2 decades, began to scream. He needed surgical interventions just to maintain basic mobility. And then came the diagnosis that stopped him cold: severe sleep apnea. His massive body was ceasing to breathe over 100 times every single night. Not struggling to breathe, stopping completely. For thousands of nights, while the rest of the world slept soundly, his body was quietly suffocating in the dark. His organs were starving for oxygen while his championship rings sat cold and silent on the nightstand. His physician delivered the news without softening it. If this continued, he would not survive it. The man who had been branded Superman by a planet of fans was told that he needed a plastic mask strapped to his face every night just to see the next morning. He could have retreated into denial. He could have hidden it. Instead, he made a decision in private that no camera captured and no press release announced. He was going to fight for his life. Over 5 grueling years, he stripped 55 pounds of dangerous weight off his frame. Every morning began with removing the mask and choosing, consciously, to do the work again. His hips screamed through every workout. Every step on damaged joints was a negotiation between what his body wanted to do and what he was demanding it do anyway. He did not do it for endorsements. He did not do it for television. He did it because he had looked into his children's faces after his son's heart surgery and made them a promise that they would not have to mourn another father taken too soon. In 2026, the 54-year-old Shaquille O'Neal commands a $500 million empire that spans food, fitness, real estate, and media. The custom Rolls-Royces that ferry him through the world are stretched to accommodate a man who has simply outgrown every standard environment. The television laugh is real. It always has been. But the most revealing moments of his life in 2026 are not found in boardrooms or broadcast studios. They are found in the aisles of Walmart and Home Depot, where he wanders without a publicist or a camera crew and spots a mother at a checkout counter quietly counting change, or a kid staring at a laptop he cannot afford. He pays the bill and leaves before anyone can identify him. He is not searching for gratitude. He is searching for the boy from Newark who still lives somewhere inside his 350-pound frame. He knows what it is to want something and have nobody there to make it possible. He has always known. The nights are the truest measure of where he is. After the cameras stop and the day ends, he sits on the edge of a custom bed in a $50 million estate and reaches. Not for a trophy, not for a phone, but for a plastic CPAP mask. He places it over his face. He listens to the mechanical hiss of forced oxygen, filling a pair of lungs that he now knows he cannot take for granted. And he waits for sleep, knowing that every morning he wakes up is a morning he earned, not a morning he was simply given. The 4 championship rings in that house are real. The Olympic gold is real. The $500 million is real. But the loudest sound in Shaquille O'Neal's life in 2026 is the sound of that machine breathing for him in the dark. A sound that reminds the most physically dominant athlete of the modern era that the body that conquered an entire industry is fragile in ways that no amount of greatness can protect against. He spent 30 years breaking backboards to tell the world he belonged. He is spending this chapter learning something harder and more important. How to be still, how to be present, how to be a father to adult children who grew up watching him be a brand, and how to face the quiet truth that the heaviest weight he has ever lifted is not a championship trophy or a man twice his size trying to guard him in the post. It is the decision made every single morning when the mask comes off and the room is silent and the sun has not yet fully come through the windows to try again, to be better, to stay. He never broke. He bent. And in the bending, he finally became something more interesting than Superman. He became a man.